Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, folks. I'm Yoshi Pradhan, and welcome back to my channel. This presentation has been long overdue, mostly because if you look at the date, that was the date I prepared the presentation. However, if you know when URTEC was held this year, or the Unconventional Resources Technology Conference was held on June 20 through 22nd of 2022. I typically give URTEC reviews immediately after these conferences to provide my insights. But as you may know, with the MBA program and with crazy schedules, I thought I might as well prepare this presentation ahead of time before I start digging into details of what I think are some of the URTEC highlights. I did something a little bit different this time. This time I have questions, technical questions, and what papers can answer those questions. Remember, these questions are not an exhaustive list, and I do take into account your attention span. Therefore, I kept this review to cover 11 papers in their brief bullet points, as well as the paper numbers and the titles. That way you can reference them in the video. Please note that all these thoughts are my own, not based on any of the associations that I'm with. Well, let's get to the content. So the first question you might be asking is, what are some of the methodologies to determine well performance from production data? Well, there are a couple papers that I want everyone to bring their attention to. The first one is 3718045. Which is multi-phase flowing material balance without rail perm curves. This was written by Whitson and Simmerichs at the time, but it's Cotera now. This is a physics-based, non-iterative, and easily implemented, for example, in simple spreadsheet programs. It does not rely on knowledge of uncertain inputs such as reservoir permeability, completion geometries, or rail perm relationships. It requires only initial reservoir pressure, initial saturation estimates, fluid PVT properties, and measured production data, so surface rates and BHPs. So the multi-phase flowing material balance, there's plenty of papers that cover multi-phase flowing material balance, especially the ones that are more recent. So this paper goes more into the multi-phase flowing material balance and how you don't have to use any rail perm curves. It's agnostic to frac geometries to understand a well performance. In fact, you can find lots of parameters within multi-phase flowing material balance and well performance without having to understand the fracture geometry. But you can make correlations to fracture geometry parameters to some of the results that you get from the multi-phase flowing material balance. It's a clarification I wanted to make. The next paper I thought that was very interesting that Oxy wrote is that your understanding of water cut trends in the Permian Basin, unconventional reservoirs, and their relationship to development and production strategies. So I wrote some takeaways that came from the paper, and these are some of the conclusion bullet points. For instance, increasing water cut trend is mostly because of improved completion methods, increased well density, and aggressive production techniques that speed up the fluid withdrawal rates. Without pressure maintenance from injection, gas cap expansion, or aquifer influx, changes in water cut are controlled by changes in fluid properties, saturation, and effective perm with pressure depletion. The trend is normal for a volumetric oil reservoir under solution gas drive. It will keep on increasing as the operational efficiency keeps on improving and the reservoir depletes faster. The study also found that increasing water cut trend did not have a significant impact on section oil recovery. However, I will say that if you are comparing wells in a section and a particular well has extremely high water cut, if that well is an infill well, chances are that that well has a high water cut due to depletion. It's another fun fact I want to say regarding this presentation or this paper. I strongly suggest you read both of these papers in order to answer some of your questions on production methodologies to determine well performance. The next couple of papers that I want to cover are 3707494, which is Midland Basin Wolfcamp Resource Assessment using well spacing normalized recovery per section. And this is from Vencer Energy. They use the SPWF3 monograph 3 to come up with recovery versus wells per section. And they evaluate DSU level data at lower variance and typically seen reviewing individual well technical recoverable resource. And then at dense well spacing, differences in stem designs, landing targets, and parent-child reservoir heterogeneity between DSUs are less significant than wells per section. So that are some interesting things that one can do, for instance, in using public data to look at recoverables versus wells per section, and then figuring out for yourself, where do you fall in that particular development that you want to propose. The next paper is written by Oxy again, is that it's an integration of machine learning and numerical simulation to estimate child well depletion using machine learning to customize unit spacing for maximum acreage value. So both of these papers. So the model suggests that parent-child well pairs completed within the same landing generate increased child well depletion. And then after considering a number of potential metrics to predict child depletion, the relative EUR for the child well to that of the nearest similar non-child infill well is demonstrated the best results. And they analyzed a robust, well-distributed parent-child data set using a combination of empirical data and numerical simulation outputs, which was then utilized to develop a predictive machine learning model, comprising a multilinear regression model and simple neural network. So I strongly suggest you read these papers to determine your well spacing development options, and then how you can use neural networks and artificial intelligence. The next paper I want to talk about is how can one determine technical recoverable resource from geochemistry data. Now, I'm someone who's a fan of geochemistry data and combining it with engineering analysis. For instance, if you look at 372.2977, reliable EUR prediction using geochemistry-derived drainage profiles of 200 plus wells in the Anadarko Basin, this was written by Red Bluff Resources, and here are some of the results of that study. They created a mobile oil map derived from drainage profiles of over 200 wells and basic log data. Key controls of EUR can be identified, mapped, and then utilized as a predictive well location selection tool that predicts EUR with 75% plus accuracy. So they also integrated geochemically derived reservoir characterization indices, production allocation, and P90 drainage heights. Potential flow barriers or baffles can be detected in overlapped vertical drainage, and stacked or staggered wells can be identified, aiding in proper well targeting, stacking, and spacing. So by calibrating EUR prediction models using the production allocation results from the actual production of 200 plus wells, the history-matched RPI model is now able to make more accurate predictions in future well performance. So I strongly suggest you read this paper in how you can use geochemistry data and advanced geochemistry data in order for you to determine your well performance. The next paper I thought everyone should read is 372.3632, Reservoir Characterization and Monitoring Using Geochemical Fingerprinting Technology with Case Studies in the Delaware Basin and Eagle Ford. So over 6 months, all 8 wells in the Eagle Ford 1 and 2 showed different drainage profiles, tending to move upward over time. An overlap drainage contribution was observed between E1 and E2 producers, while overlap drainage between D1 and E1 producers is 20 to 30%, which suggests that co-development strategy is the beneficial strategy for these benches. So I apologize, this is Delaware Basin. I'm confusing myself with another paper that had Delaware Basin and Eagle Ford, and that was written by Geomark. And I strongly suggest you read that paper as well. By integrating DRV data from geochemistry analysis from microseismic information, this case study reveals that in the wells with significantly higher water production and contacted upper zones with high water saturation, timing of the DRE movement also corresponds closely with the WR change. This information is useful for optimizing landing targets for both oil productivity to avoid high water cut zones. And then this goes more into detail of some of the well results, which I just put on here as well. That way, when you read the paper, you can reference these conclusions. And then gas lift can have a notable impacts on drainage. So it's a 20% and due to changes in flowing pressure, but it also appears to be temporary. So that's just interesting how you can combine production mechanisms with geochemistry as well. Now the next question I wrote is, what are some production optimization techniques to reduce downtime or improve recoveries? The first paper is 3719479, Effective Water Treatment in the Permian and the Marcellus Shales to Mitigate Surface Equipment Failures. Water and high levels of residual oxidative biocide like chlorine dioxide, and peracetic acid can play major roles in the accelerated corrosion and premature failure of ground iron and rubber seals. The use of brine-soluble filming corrosion inhibitors formulated with a blend of quaternary amines, surfactants, and oxygen scavengers is extremely effective at controlling the corrosion, pitting of frac iron in high salinity environments where scaling can be an issue. The Langmuir saturation index can be an effective tool to predict corrosivity of water. The LSI is not only based on the salinity and pH, but calculated from the alkalinity, hardness, and surface. PAA blends with residual levels of 3 to 5 ppm have the highest impact on corrosion rate of all three biocides tested, showing earlier signs of pitting in the ground irons. So I strongly suggest you read this paper if you want to go more into the details of water chemistry and how that impacts your surface equipment failures. As someone who is on the reservoir side, just looking at some of this stuff in the subsurface is what fascinates me. The next paper is 3708626, or Tackling a Critical Drainage Challenge in Shale Development in the Delaware Basin, Interdisciplinary Field Case Study on Subsurface Scale Diagnosis and Control Impact on Production Performance. So Chevron wrote a really cool paper in terms of their workflow in how they determine scale in certain wells and what is the proactive way to reduce scale. So scale deposition is observed at the wellhead, or even production tubing may not represent the primary type of scale that blocks hydrocarbon production from target shale formation. Calcite is observed as a primary scale at the wellhead. However, the primary scale impacting oil production is barite at the subsurface. Produced water sampling analysis, water chemistry, data interpretation, and scale modeling results provide a key approach to subsurface scale diagnosis and root cause analysis. Compared to hydrocarbon formation water production from the target shale formation, the production of movable external water sources can be significantly less impacted by scale formation because of the higher perm along the fractures than through the frac face. Under this scenario, scale deposition to porous media near the frac face can lead to significant increase in water cut, which can explain the observed 99% water cut in, and this is in the case study, well A and well B, and the 65% or lower water cut in the analogous well. There has been limited case study in the industry to quantitatively investigate the impact of subsurface scale formation on EUR from the shale and tight formation. So they were preempting this question that in terms of scale, is there a correlation to your EUR? But I strongly suggest you read this paper if you want to get a better understanding of the workflow and how to be predictive in preventing your scale formation in your wells. Now, the last slide I want to show is what are some completion diagnostics that can help influence decisions. Now, I have 3 papers here. First is 3723054, measuring fracture-induced stress shadow using fiber optic sensing and its implications on fracture simulation design. The strain on fiber and the rate of decline on strain with the distance can be measured. It seems to offer insight to what is happening in the rock. Strain decline is calculated from a data set of 70 stages and compared to other published industry experiments and publicly available analytical derivations of stress transmissibility. There is an uncertainty to what fiber is actually measuring in the formation, whether the transfer mechanism of strain on the fiber is caused by stress decline or something approaching the hydraulic diffusivity through an overpressured and highly sheared rock matrix. Overall, the better understanding of multi-mode fracture failure, mode 1 through 3, or mixed, is in highly overpressured and low perm shale reservoirs could offer a better explanation for what these diagnostic tools are telling us rather than a conceptual model of linear elasticity. The next paper I thought I'd suggest is 3722960, Estimating Reservoir Pressure Gradient from Stage-by-Stage Pressure Fall-Off Analysis in Shale Horizontal Wells, or shear frac. This is an analytical simulator that's been built with integration of completion reservoir parameters to match the fall-off data for each stage, and matching the injection and fall-off periods results in defining a fracture geometry, conductivity, and finally, the reservoir pressure for each stage. The last paper I thought I'd share is the innovative and simple approach to spatially evaluate proxy stress shadow effect unconventional completion activity. So Chevron wrote an interesting paper in terms of the slopes of the ISIPs as a feature into determining stress shadowing effects. So they have a machine learning model called FRITZ. It's a stress shadow proxy as an informative statistically significant feature. So they call it FRITZ, so it's not actually a model, I apologize, but FRITZ is a feature. ALICE is the subsurface modeling tool that provides a strong trend observation for stress shadow proxy and how it helps characterize the reservoir. The positive correlation of near flat ISIP regression slopes to better long-term oil production performance, and reciprocal negative correlation between steep ISIP build and well production performance circumstantially suggests that the stress shadow is a key production driver. Intense and positive compounding interaction from brittleness, stress shadow, and completion size predictors build on the circumstantial but data-driven insight. So I strongly suggest you read this paper as well if you want to get a better understanding on how to quantify stress shadowing. Well, folks, that's a wrap. I've covered about 16 minutes worth of content for you all in terms of this URTEC review of 11 papers. As usual, please be sure to like this video, subscribe so you can get more content in oil and gas and professional development topics, and please be sure to comment on the video below on the YouTube platform so I can incorporate your feedback into future videos. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch this video, and I'll see you in the next one.